2023, boldly dependent and learning to abide in our relationship with Jesus Christ.
I depend on you. I depend on you. Yes, I depend on you. I depend on you. Oh, I depend on you. Yes, I depend on you. I depend on you. I depend on you. You're the way, the truth, and the life. You're the well that never runs dry. I'm the branch and you are the vine. Draw me close and teach me to abide. Be my strength, my song in the night. Be my all, my treasure, my prize. I am yours, forever you're mine. Draw me close and teach me to I depend on you for eternal life, to be raised with Christ. Oh, I depend on you. Yes, I depend on you. You're the way, the truth, and the life. You're the well that never runs dry. I'm the branch and you are the vine. Draw me close and teach me to abide. Be my strength, my song in the night. Be my all, my treasure, my prize. I am yours, forever you're mine. Draw me close and teach me to Would you teach me?
We must all boldly depend on God.
Hey, welcome and Happy New Year to you. I know that for some of us, that recap video was pretty amazing because you've been part of Vitalpoint for a very long time, and that was so powerful. Others of you maybe are newer to Vitalpoint Church, and this recap gives you a bit of a taste of who we are. I know for me, the first time I saw it a few weeks ago, I literally shed a tear. Like, I got emotional. Like, I just couldn't believe all the amazing things that have been going on in the life of Vitalpoint Church over this past year of 2023. Let me just give you a quick update on Christmas. If you don't receive our weekly email or an email from me on occasion to let you know what's going on, I got to tell you, Christmas this year, 4 locations, 9 services, over 1,100 people participated, and I got to tell you, it was epic. It was unbelievable. If you invited a friend that's not connected to a church and they came with you, congrats. I'm sure that was such an amazing feeling. You're probably very excited that they were with you. Others of you who invited a friend that's not connected to church but they didn't make it, congratulations. You planted a seed. I want you to think about that. Some of us can get discouraged when our friends don't come with us, but you planted the seed. I love one of our values as a church. It's the value of investing and inviting those who've not yet encountered Jesus. All right. So today is a wrap-up conversation. It's going to be around Boldly Dependent. Happen to be wearing the hoodie, and I want to talk about that today. See, over the past year, we have focused on this statement, and it has run through everything that we have done as a church. And as it's been emerging over this past year, we've run everything through this idea of how do we be boldly dependent. See, when a church like ours is on mission, vision, and kingdom assignment, we have to have a statement that helps us realize that this is not dependent upon ourselves. Because I think that's what happens sometimes. We kind of look around and go, look what we did, look what we did. No, it is learning to be boldly dependent. What's really exciting around Vitalpoint over the past number of years is we have attached ourselves either to a word or to a phrase that has helped us better understand the course of the year. So for example, 2020 was the word obedience. Now, we all know what happened in 2020. We, as a church, our portable site lost its trailer. Someone stole it. We got most of the stuff back. And then, as we know, 2020 was a very difficult year for many. 2021, we talked about this idea of prioritizing faith formation. That was sort of what we were looking at in 2021. 2022 was abundantly more. That was an epic year of a church as we were expanding and growing. And this year, obviously, I've been talking about it, 2023, boldly dependent. Now, collectively, we as a church have been learning what it means to be boldly dependent, right? We've been learning as a church, how do we continue to step into the future? How do we step forward knowing that God is leading us in a certain direction, but yet our dependence upon Him is not so that we can make it happen. It is so that other people will know who God is. This is what I love about what God does. We see this in the Old Testament with God's people. We see this in the New Testament with the church, and we see it with us today, is that in our dependence upon God, it is so that Jesus would be known. Think about our vision statement and our mission statement as a church. It's to point people to Jesus. That's what we want and hope for people in their lives. We don't want people necessarily to just become followers of Vitalpoint Church. Although, our subscriptions are growing on YouTube and more people are starting to watch our social media and things like that. But ultimately, it is to point people to Jesus and to help them better understand. So in our actions as boldly dependent, we together as a community are growing in our better understanding of what does it mean to be dependent upon God. Like, can we do this all in our own knowledge and our own smarts? Yeah, we've got enough smart people, enough energy, and enough, experience and muscle memory. But yet at the end of the day, we don't want to do anything without recognizing that it is about raising the awareness of God and what He's doing through us by the power of the Holy Spirit, pointing people to Jesus. It's that boldly dependent. Now, for me, it's interesting because, and maybe for you as well, I'm learning this myself. Like this year, I went back to my journal in early January and actually discovered in January, first few days in January, I actually was talking about and journaling about, okay, God, you've given us this prophetic word. Are you leading us to forest? Jesus, have you walked through town of forest, and do you want us to follow you? And then I wrote, about, do you want us to have the Christmas service in 2023 in Forest? And then we would announce that we're going to be launching in 2024. And would the church, Junction Church in Forest, would they be willing to close and join in, and we build on what they've already done? And it's in this bold dependence, in this journaling, that I see that God was actually moving powerfully. And we as a church are learning how to do this. We do this together collectively, which is amazing because in our collective bold dependence upon God, it actually inspires us individually. This is the other part of this boldly dependent that I think is happening across Vitalpoint Church collectively together, is that I am hearing incredible stories of people learning to be boldly dependent upon God. The stories are absolutely incredible, absolutely amazing, and I think it's a beautiful thing. Now, what's cool about this, and I'm going to get to the wrap-up of Boldly Dependent in a second, so just bear with me, is that I see what God is doing, especially starting in 2020, as He's building on each of the phrases, because the phrase doesn't go away. It's not like we're no longer going to be boldly dependent upon God or abundantly more or faith formation and all these things. in obedience. It is actually the building of these things that God is doing, which is creating incredible momentum in what God is doing. And I am so thrilled about all of this. Now we want to do a wrap up of Boldly Dependent. And I'm going to take you back to the very first talk I gave this year. And I don't expect you to remember it. So I'm just going to recap it all and kind of bring it back into sight for us. I am going to be using some of the same material, but then I'm also going to be adding some to it. Now, where did Boldly Dependent come from? It actually came from a section of the Bible called 1 Samuel, and it comes from the life of this guy named David. He would eventually become the king of God's people. And this is where we learned about being boldly dependent. I want to read it for you again. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. So here we go. Now, there's some words in here that I'll have a hard time pronouncing, but you just bear with me. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive. Here's a tough name: Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. Yeah, look them up for yourself. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. What a powerful thing that's happened here. Now, let me give you some context, because it's in ancient times. If you're not familiar with the Bible, you actually have these battle scenes and so on. If you've ever seen the show The Last Kingdom, it's kind of a bit of that. I don't suggest younger crowd watch that, but it's kind of that feel. What would happen often is that you would have these opposing people groups that they would go to battle. And what they would do is they would literally burn the place to the ground, and typically they would kill everybody that was in that town. And the reason was they didn't want a generation to grow up to then take revenge on those who oppressed them and abused them and killed them. So there was often these unbelievable battle scenes that the Bible records for us. Now here, it's interesting. The Amalekites, they burn Ziklag, but they take the sons and daughters of David and his wives and his army, which is about 600 men. When they get back to Ziklag, now David and his army had been out battling and fighting, and they were no longer needed. Bit of a complex story, but they get sent back to Ziklag, and when they get there, they discover, to their dismay, what has happened. They are absolutely wrecked to their core. It says that they wept so deeply they had no more strength to weep. Have you ever been there? I mean, David even describes this for himself in Psalm chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. He's a bit of a poet, not only a warrior, but he's also a poet. He says this: I am weary with my mourning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes. I mean, this is incredible when you think about it. The depth and the deepness of the sorrow that he expresses in the writing in Psalm 6, but also in the scenario. I mean, have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that deep sorrow? I know I have. In the year of 2020 with the word obedience, I got to tell you, there was a day where I literally felt what this is describing here. I called a friend of mine who hired me my very first pastor job. I was going through some really tough stuff, and I called him. I was in the parking lot, Canadian Tire in North London, and I was weeping in my car. I get home. I go to my basement, my lower basement where there's no windows, and I had the lights off, and I was on my couch, and I could not control the sorrow and the grief and the pain that I was carrying. I was in distress in that moment. David and his men are completely spent. But notice what the men do with their grief. They blame David. And they begin to come up with a plan to kill David. I mean, this is ludicrous. These men had been with David in battle. These men had stood shoulder to shoulder with David. And in this moment of bitterness, they turn on him. See, often in our pain, we feel that we need to blame someone, right? Place it on someone else. I hear this in people when there's pain or sorrow or grief or from bad choices and decisions and they can't just get out of things. We want to place it on somebody else. We want to place it on our boss. We want to place it on our manager, on our church, on our pastor. We want to place it maybe on our friends, our siblings. We got to blame someone. And even some of us go as far as blaming it on our parents, right? Sometimes our parents carry this weight of people pointing, their kids pointing fingers at them. This past Christmas evening, everybody had left our house and we were at home with our two sons and their wives. It was just the six of us. And we were sitting around, we were talking about this very thing. And what was interesting about this is that we were talking about how oftentimes people don't take responsibility for themselves. They want to blame other people. And then our youngest son, he said, if my life comes apart, I'm never going to blame you as parents. I'm going to hold them to it. I actually wrote it down. No, I didn't. I'm kidding. I didn't write it down. But I think it was such a beautiful, in-depth conversation. See, I wonder if a sign of maturity in someone's life is they can actually take ownership for their own lives. But that's for another conversation. These men are planning in their bitterness to kill David. They blame him for losing their families. They're exhausted to the point of no strength, but yet they can still come up with a strategy to kill David. I mean, unbelievable. But look what David does. This is incredible. David, with nothing left in the tank, nothing left. Also the pressure of what was being placed on him by his men, he goes to God. He goes to God to find strength in the Lord his God. Now, it might just be me, but I love this. David doesn't get angry at God. He doesn't get angry at God for not protecting his family. He doesn't blame God. He said, you don't care about me anymore. He doesn't start saying, well, you must not exist because bad things have happened to me. He doesn't do that. He doesn't even blame the Amalekites. He finds strength in God. What a bold move, isn't it? He's at the end of himself. And in that moment, he turns to the only one that can give him strength. I love this. It says that he finds strength in the Lord his God. It's like this nourishment for his soul comes from a place of surrender in that moment. David had come to the end of himself. And in that space, he goes to God and draws up strength from him. David reveals the validity of his faith in this moment. He turns immediately to God for his strength. What a bold move. He detaches himself from the pressure of what was in his own heart from losing his family, his wives and his children, but also the men that were placing pressure. He didn't attach himself to them. He attached himself to God. His strength came as he soaked up God's presence. Think about this. Our lives are going so fast and so quick. We don't take time to take up a presence with God. We don't take time to be in his presence to gain strength. We're all about performing and proving who we are. And I think there's times where we just need to stop and push the pause button and soak in God's presence of who he is. But then his strength came as he secured himself in God's power. He had no strength, but he knew the one who could give him strength to face the moment that he was in. And also his strength came as he sought God's plan. You can read it for yourself. Starting in verse 7, you see that he actually goes to a priest and he seeks God's direction. And God makes it very clear that he is to go and to rescue his family and the family of those who he's responsible for. It was 400 men that went with him. It would have been easy to buckle under the pressure, to sink deep into this moment, right? I'm not a great leader. How could I have allowed this to happen? Why didn't I see this coming? We don't know what the men said to David, but in this moment, he goes to God. He doesn't ignore it. He doesn't pretend it didn't happen. He was greatly distressed, but he was willing to get to that place to draw strength from God. In the talk at the beginning of this year, I made a statement, and the statement was this: trials and testing often prove the validity of one's faith. Fickle faith reveals shallow dependence upon God. Trials and testings reveal the validity of one's faith. Just before Christmas, someone in our church, she lost her husband. He passed away. He passed away literally in her arms. And I was at the funeral, and I know there was deep pain. She was very clear on that. But yet, in this trial of losing her husband, I witnessed the validity of the faith that she had that was so incredibly resilient. Fickle faith reveals the shallow dependence upon God. For some reason, when I made that statement earlier this year, I didn't explain what fickle faith was. And I think we need to talk about that for just a brief second. A fickle faith is often based primarily if our circumstances are going our way or not, right? A fickle faith would say, well, bad things are coming, so God doesn't care about me. Or maybe our faith is built on the comfort and convenience of our faith, or of our circumstances, which determines the level of our faith. We're committed as long as everything's going our way and everything's going good. As long as no one's hurt me or wronged me, then I'll be fine. But the truth is, that only reveals the shallowness of a faith that actually is not resilient. And I think the proof of David's validity of his faith showed us that the strength and the root system of his faith was dynamic. And oftentimes, for some of us, not all of us, but some of us, our faith is so fickle because our root system is very shallow. This past year as a church, we've had some moments where I'm going to tell you, we have had to be boldly dependent upon God. There has been some moments this past year where I have wondered what was going on in the life of our church. Our third site in Clinton, we launched it just over a year ago, had a leadership change, and I was uncertain as to what we were going to do. Numerous times our staff, our senior staff, and some of my family would actually remind me, hey, Ron, don't forget, you picked boldly dependent. I'm like, I didn't pick it. God gave it to us. But yet they would remind me of it. And staff would say the same things. In our prayer calls, we would be boldly dependent upon God. I wasn't sure. And I even got to a point where I wondered if we couldn't find someone, if we would have to shut our third site down in Clinton. It crossed my mind. It was a fleeting moment. Don't fret. It was just a fleeting moment. But in this boldly dependent, God made it clear for us to approach someone who'd been part of our church in the past but had moved to Nova Scotia over a year ago. And it was a long shot. I mean, it was like, will this even happen? I set up a call. I pitched the position. They prayed. John and Allison prayed. And God directed them and gave them clarity. And the sacrifice that they made to sell their home and to come back. And now John is our site pastor in Clinton. And God is rebuilding that community. As a church, we're boldly dependent on raising $1 million. God had given me this number over 2 years ago, and I sat on it and sat on it. I went to our board of directors, and I said in 2022, and I said, I believe that God wants us to raise $1 million for our future expansions and for what God's doing in the life of our church to support it, to release kingdom resources. We've had committed and given almost half, and by March 2024, we're trusting and believing that God is going to provide the rest to hit the $1 million. Now, if we don't hit the $1 million, God is still providing, and I still believe that we can be boldly dependent. One more example of boldly dependent for us as a church, Forest. What a year. I will never forget our Vision Builder event when we launched Forest in that moment. It was unbelievable for me. I even get goosebumps now thinking about it. But as we were going, and we had a plan, we had an idea of what we wanted to see happen, and we weren't able to find a site leader. And then we started wondering, is God going to stir up someone and disrupt their lives? And sure enough, God started moving in a couple's life in London, and he was the pastor of a church in London. And we saw God provide our site pastor for Forest. And today is December 31st, and he starts tomorrow. He gets a day off starting, but he starts tomorrow in his position as the site pastor of Forest. What has been hitting me about this and this theme of boldly dependent when we finally come to the end of ourselves, is when we live in a place of dependence. There's a daily sweet spot in our faith where we allow God to be our source and our strength. I know that flies in the face of our Western thinking. I know. It's opposite to what we've been taught. It's opposite to what we teach our kids. We teach our kids independent, self-sufficient. You don't need anybody. Just depend upon yourself. In our culture, there's a hum that tells us that you've arrived when you don't need anybody in your life. And to some degree, I could say, yeah, I get that. But if we buy into it fully, it actually damages our understanding of being fully dependent upon God and our walk with Jesus. I wonder at times if we're just simply not desperate enough. I've traveled enough and have seen believers around the world, followers of Jesus around the world, who know daily what does it mean to depend boldly on God for their life each and every single day. Now, David was at the end of himself. And in that moment, he fully understood that he needed God in that moment. God was going to move and work in his life. We must understand, though, that in our bold dependence, we still work hard. We still pray. We still sacrifice. It's not like we sit around with our twiddling our thumbs and our feet up on our desks and kind of, well, whatever God's going to do, God's going to do. No. There's still an element of the hard work. The kingdom of God is like a man who scatters seeds, and the seeds grow night and day. We don't know how, but then there comes the harvest, and we put the sickle in the ground. Yes, there is that bold dependence upon God to bring about the growth. This is his church, not our church. It's his church. He will do what he wants to do. In our obedience, in our trusting, in our dependence upon him, we see God doing great things. This past year has been amazing as a church. We've baptized more people than ever before. We've seen God do powerful works in people's lives, reconciling stories of redemptive work and goodness coming out of pain. There's a vibrancy in our church right now. And what I love so much about our church is this, is that we're learning how to give room for others who are learning how to surrender to Jesus, giving room for others who are on the journey of living in that fully developing space of becoming more like Jesus. That's what's so dynamic about this church, is that there's room for everybody trying to sort through. You could be here for the very first time experiencing Vitalpoint Church, and you can be part of what God is doing. You could have been here the very first Sunday in 2014, and God is bringing us together to move forward. What an amazing year of God's provision. What an amazing year of being boldly dependent upon God. And what I want to do is I want to end with this. What area of your life do you need to be boldly dependent upon God? What area do you need to step into? Even though this is the last Sunday of 2023, you can carry this into 2024. What is it right now? Because I believe that many of us are developing a stronger root system in our faith that's resilient and strong, because we're going to need it for 2024. Next Sunday, we're going to, the first Sunday of first Sunday of January, we're going to unpack what our theme is for 2024. And I hope that you'll be part of that experience.